cloud again. I'll merge the two pieces together with like a 15-second gap from the last one. So this session is for the participants in ACUE to talk a little bit about the takeaways and to give any information for people who might be interested in signing up for it. And we believe there's going to be another session starting this fall. We're working on, the provost is working on the final details of that and looking at some options, but it looks like there'll be another cohort beginning, which is, I think, really great news. But could we have perhaps each one of you talk a little bit about your experiences with ACUE and maybe some of the takeaways, some things you've learned from it, some things that you've tried that you hadn't tried before, and what did you find most useful in the program? Who would like to go first? Any volunteers?
I can go first.
Okay.
So I was actually talking about the ACUE with one of my former colleagues from Kentucky, and I was telling her about the program. And I remember one of the things I've mentioned is this idea of not only that you learn about different teaching techniques, but your assignments are about implementing those teaching techniques. And on the surface, I was thinking about the technique and I would say, well, I would do this and I would do that, but then I would have, I would rub noses with the assignment, and I had to think a little bit more in detail and in depth about, okay, this is how I would implement. And it's a totally different scenario when you get to implement these techniques. And even after you implement them, you realize that, oh, I can perfect this in a particular way. And there's this aspect of implementing the techniques that you're being thought about. I think it's probably one of the best aspects of the course itself, because the assignments that you complete are about how you implemented that and what would be the perceived effect of, to the extent to which you can measure it.
And from a standpoint of the teaching center, we have given workshops on some topics over and over again. I had given workshops on clickers where some people would attend them 5 or 6 or 7 times before actually using them. The great thing about ACUE, I think, is what Mihai just suggested, that not only do you learn about the new techniques and get some really good tips on how to implement it effectively from experts in the field, but you have to actually do it. And once you get past that barrier of doing something for the first time, it's so much easier than overcoming, the status quo bias of sticking with what you're comfortable with. And I think that's a really effective part of the ACUE program. Who else would like to talk a little bit about some of the takeaways from the ACUE program? Okay, Jacqueline?
So I will just say, like, one of the things that I found to be really helpful of the program is a lot of the stuff that we learned was actually stuff that I've been picking up off of Twitter, sort of among academics on Twitter. But I learned not only what I was like learning about off of there and how it was effective, but I also learned things that maybe could be done more effectively. So I thought, given that there is such a broad-based community of academics on social media who are sharing information, with all due respect, largely unchecked, I thought that it was really helpful to see kind of the foundations of where those techniques came from and how I could take what I was learning on there and potentially implement it in a way that was more beneficial to me with a little bit more discretion other than what you get in 240 characters.
And it also gives you some really good people to follow on Twitter who've done much of the research on this too.
Absolutely.
Other takeaways? Bill?
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked about the course was that it forced me to think through why I do certain things in the classroom, because we all get into habits in the classroom. When we set up a new class, we kind of fall back on frameworks that we have from classes we've taught before, and we don't really stop to think about, why am I doing this way? What is it that I'm hoping to get students, hoping my students will get out of this particular type of assignment or this particular structure of the course? And even when we have those ideas, we know for ourselves why we're doing that. One of the things that the course really kind of emphasizes, especially in the early parts of it, was, working at explaining that to students, making sure they know why you're having them do these things, so that there's both a connection between, what you're trying to get them to get out of the course and how you're structuring your assignments, and that they understand what that connection is. And, I thought it was really valuable to me and really interesting to kind of sit and think for myself, okay, well, they're talking about these different things. And some of the techniques in each module were things that I was already doing, and some were things that I was interested in trying. And there were a few that I said, okay, that's really something that I don't feel comfortable with or don't think is appropriate for the kinds of classes that I teach. And then there'd be one or two sometimes that would be like, wow, I never thought of that. That seems so obvious and so simple, but I never thought of doing things that way. And just sitting and thinking through, having to think, okay, when I'm doing a large lecture class, how do I do that and why do I do things that way? When I'm teaching a discussion-based class, how do I try and generate discussion, and why is that the way that I do it? Why am I asking those particular types of questions? When I give an assignment to my students, why am I doing this type of assignment? Making myself think through that, I thought, was really valuable at this stage as a teacher, to, after years of doing things in a particular way, to really have to each week stop and say, okay, let me reevaluate my approach to this. And so it kind of pushed me to do that. And I really thought that was a valuable exercise, to really be able to say to myself, okay, I need to understand what it is that I'm doing, to think it through more consciously, rather than simply having fallen into certain comfortable ways of doing things. And then I need to understand that it's important that my students know why I'm doing things that way. And, so I thought that those things were really valuable elements of the course.
And just following up on that a little bit with my own experience working through this, that, for all the things you said are really important, and the reflection activity involved with those write-ups is really helpful, because we often just do things in the same way. But one other thing that I found useful was when they had those demonstration videos that you had to analyze for what people were doing well and what they didn't do quite as well. I could see myself in all parts of that at times, and seeing those examples of other people doing the things that you sometimes may have done too. It was nice to be able to observe that from the outside in ways that we normally don't, or at least that was something I appreciated about the program. I think Ranjit was next, and then David. Unmute, Ranjit.
Unmute. Yeah, I don't have too much to say. William said a lot of the same things I was going to say. Just going over all the different activities and techniques and seeing so many things that I do, but that could be done a lot of different ways and better. Applying those little refinements and modifications was really useful, and I got a lot out of it. And like Mihai said, having your homework be go into the classroom and do this and see how, dozens of people respond to it was neat. I've never really had homework assignments like that.
David?
So Bill said exactly what I was thinking at the moment I put my hand up, which was, why do I do what I do? But on top of that, I think it's also kind of added that extra filter as I'm going through and teaching material, and thinking to myself, both as I'm prepping and as I'm lecturing it, what can I do here? What can I do with this to further engage the class, especially if I have a class where like everything was just like a dud, nothing landed. And I can go back afterwards and say, okay, well, what happened there? And I can kind of Monday morning quarterback it and say, well, thinking back to what I learned from ACUE, what could I do with this material to maybe get it through to them in a different way? So I think that's not something that I was actively doing before, because as other people have said, kind of that built-in stationary way of doing things, just because it's what you're comfortable with. And now I kind of have that extra self-critique in place that I can refer to when I need to.
Andrea.
I mean, so many people have said other things I've been thinking about, but kind of building off of even a little bit of what Jacqueline brought up as well as Bill, sometimes you'll hear about what other people do And in this case, there were some things that didn't work for other people, or they say, oh, I tried that and it didn't work, but they worked okay for me. And so I think something that was nice about it was having that opportunity to try it and be like, hey, oh no, it did, right? Or if it didn't, it's not necessarily always just like maybe it was the context, maybe it was the explaining piece, right? I found that if I took the time to actually like explain and then debrief, things went better. But, there's some things like, doing, my big example is fish bowls. They worked really well with my class and students wanted more of them. And so I was like, okay, I guess we can do another. Sure, you want to. But I had colleagues that were like, no, these don't work at all. And then, so it's really interesting to kind of, if you go on academic Twitter or you go anywhere or you like hear about these different things, trying it out makes a huge difference, but it's that reflective part that also really helps to say, hey, well, just because it didn't work this one time doesn't mean it won't work again. So you try it again, but then it also broke me out of the mold, which was what I wanted, where it's like I always go to the same things over and over because I've tried it and it worked. But instead, having that reflective component really had me think, well, maybe the reason it didn't work before was this. Why don't you just give it another shot? And that was a little bit easier. So try some new stuff, but revisit some things and really be thinking about your choices as you're doing it.
I don't know if we're going in order.
Zoe. Zoe had her hand up.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, building on what Andrea and I think Jacqueline said about how you hear these ideas from what other people are doing, and you think, oh, that sounds good. One thing that's really valuable about this course is having some grounding to justify, why am I doing this? Why do I reasonably think it will work? So if you then have to, write your annual reflection on how you're doing effective things, you can say, I had a reason for doing this. I thought about it. It has evidence behind it. And so I think that was really helpful in giving me the confidence to not just try something because someone said it randomly, but because, oh, I actually have a reason to expect this might turn out well.
Okay. And someone else was going to contribute? Nick?
Yeah, I just, I think all of the folks here who have spoken are really saying what I feel. I just figured I'd give a little anecdote. I taught junior high school and high school in Brooklyn for 4.5 years. And the amount of professional development and teaching and pedagogy that we went through as K-12 educators was intense, right? And I've been teaching here at Oswego just going on 3 years now. And I did a little bit of adjuncting before that, but there is very little preparation for going in front of an undergraduate classroom versus a adolescent class. And I really appreciated the fact that this was really kind of giving us more tools in the toolbox, as opposed to standing in front of a lecture and, opining for 50 minutes. This was really getting me to think about how are we going to elicit discussion? How are we going to, try to bring out some of those ideas and encourage this learning that seems to be just out of reach sometimes for some of these students. So I think the activities and the just the ideas of things that we can implement in the classroom was invaluable. And like Andrea said, there are certain things that will work and there are certain things that won't work. And that is very class specific. I think, I could have two different sections of the same class and one activity will go over great, one will go over poorly. And it's just like, well, how'd that happen? And, luckily we have lots of options here. And this training really, I have all the reflections saved in a folder because I want to go back to them and, see what I did, how did I screw that up, and try to redo it in a better way next year. I mean, this was a really good experience overall for that purpose.
And Yang, do you have any reflections on things that you found helpful?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so it's been great to listen to all your takeaways, but I'm kind of new to this because I just joined SUNY Oswego last fall.
Oh, okay.
So I did a little bit of research. So I'm kind of different, representing a different group of faculty, I guess, suppose. So I'm wondering, maybe John, you can give me some background on this. like, how to join this and what I'm going to do.
Okay, I forgot you weren't part of it this time. I'm sorry. It's been
It's
been
okay.
a rough year.
I know.
So what happens is we had 2 cohorts of people go through the ACUE program, which is the American College and University Educators program. It's a course in effective teaching practices. There are 25 modules, which take place roughly once a week with a few breaks in there. We at least had breaks during that period. Where basically every week there's some topic, you read some materials about it, you watch some videos by people who either developed the techniques or have done some research on what makes the techniques particularly effective. And then you choose from a list of activities and you implement one of those in class, at least one of those in class. And then you write a reflection on that, which you then submit, and you have to complete 25 of them to the approval of the external reviewer who evaluates the reflection to make sure that you met all the criteria in the rubric for that. And you're given a little form you can use to submit it. So that's a really quick overview, but basically it covers most aspects of effective teaching, and it allows you to do it in a variety of formats. Most of the material in the version we have involves classroom demonstrations, but for each module, there were online activities that coincided with the same learning objectives that were for that module. So it's basically I think a very effective course in learning how to teach more effectively. And there's a lot of active learning activities built into it. That's a very quick overview. Maybe we could get a little bit more maybe we could go through again and ask everyone to take one specific technique that you've used that worked particularly effectively that you hadn't used before you participated in ACUE, just to give a flavor of what's involved in the ACUE program. Would anyone like to volunteer that? Okay, Mihai, are you? Okay, you're muted. You're still muted, or your microphone cut out. While Mihai is getting reconnected, would anyone else like to talk about just something that they tried doing that worked really effectively that you'd like to keep doing in the future that you picked up from the ACUE program?
I would, but I can't find my hand. Thank you. I want to start out by saying, I'm Janet Nepke from SUNY Oneonta. I want to start out by saying that I'm sure you all feel the same way, but my tech support people are saints. I think they've all learned enough prior learning assessment materials to attain a psychology degree. They were great with us. One of the things I learned by listening to another teacher was a very simple method, but it worked really well, and I'm going to keep it. She made a lot of pre-tests that, as John was saying earlier in an earlier session, are due prior to the class session. So, and they have very low points, but they do get points. So I would take 5 questions from the reading for the day, and it would be a multiple choice or true false, something that the machine graded. Occasionally I forgot and made a short answer that was stupid because I couldn't get it graded before class. But anyway, I made true, false, and multiple choice. It worked like magic. Students had actually read the material. They knew the answers in class. I'm going to do this always forever. So all you do, this teacher whose idea I copied called it a mini quiz, has the scary word quiz in there. So they go there and then they fill out 5 to 10 questions, whatever I made. They each have, I must have had 200 mini quiz questions during the semester, and each got a fraction of a point, but they take it seriously. So that's something that works like crazy. It's the charm, and I would recommend it to anybody.
It's a form of retrieval practice, which is really beneficial in encouraging long-term recall and improving your transferability, the ability to apply concepts in new environments, to new types of problems.
They can refer to the text. They can get the answers from each other. I mean, they can do whatever they want to turn in the right answer, all of which is, after all, finding the right answer. Thank you.
Mihai, are you reconnected? Thank you. Mihai? Not yet. David, your hand's up.
So one thing that I found was all the avenues for gaining direct feedback from your students, which I think was really important, because I think we really want to put across the message that we listen to you and what you and how we're doing. And it really made me think about more than just, oh, here's the student evaluation at the end of the semester, when it's far too late for me to do anything about it because the class is over. So having things like the critical incident questionnaires that you can pop in at some point. But the one that I think really had the most impact on my students was the exam wrapper. And that was after they take an exam, I give them a quick questionnaire that is, how did you prepare for this exam? If you struggled, what do you think you struggled on and why? And what are you going to do differently next time? And then it's something that they're encouraged to hang on to and refer back to when they study for the next exam. So they're really helping themselves out as much as indicating to me how they prepared for the exam. And my students, as I would be reading through all of them, I would definitely see that they were using it to its fullest extent and really doing the necessary reflection that they knew they needed to do in order to improve the next time out.
Okay. And because just as reflection is useful for us to become better at what we're doing, it's also good to encourage that with students. And exam wrappers are one technique you can use to help improve student metacognition. And I was just responding actually to the question about, do you attend a training session every week? And the ACUE course is an online course offered through the Canvas platform. And one of the nice things about it is it uses as effective teaching techniques what it's encouraging faculty to do, that there's retrieval practice going on, there's reflection, and there's some really good techniques throughout the program. And Mihai, are you reconnected?
I am. For some reason, my microphone cut out. So one of the things that, I wanted to add to the value of the course, I feel that the literature that is associated, and you've mentioned that, John, the literature that is associated with every piece, and not only, oh, there's this guy and this guy, it's actually pretty detailed literature. And for someone who does caters to this idea of scholarship and teaching and learning, I found that extremely useful. Is as if you have a massive survey of all the literature on all sorts of pieces, and it's actually very, very valuable. So I really like that. Also, speaking of the value of the course. Now, one of the techniques I got from the course, and that I found it useful, and also allowed me to interact more with students, and in essence figure out what's going on, what's going bad, are these weekly surveys or chapter surveys that I deploy when we conclude a week or a chapter. The stickiest concept, the least sticky of the concepts, what would be one question that they would answer based on what we covered. And it's eye-opening. It's eye-opening. What you think it went well, it might not have gone well. What you think it went not well, you'd be surprised that the majority would get it. So it's, in essence, it gets you on the same page with the class, and you get to realize things that went well, things that did not go well, and it also you get to answer questions that students might have. And one would think that this is a time-intensive activity. It's not. I mean, it could be as intensive as you want it, but that's one of the technique I took from the course and stuck with it in the class.
Now, one thing that's come up in a couple of people's responses is that notion of getting feedback from students. One of the things that people have often done in the past, and we haven't checked back with you guys quite as much as with the last cohort, was to talk explicitly to students about participating in the ACUE program and letting them know that you're trying some new things. Have you all talked to your students about being in the ACUE program and shared what you're learning and why you're trying some of these techniques?
I can talk a little bit. In the fall, I did. So I had it on my, so I guess I had it, yeah, I had it in there some of the time, or as like on the syllabus. And in one class, I did talk about it explicitly to say, hey, I always want to be better and, do better. And like, this is something that's going to help me learn. So sometimes I'm going to try something out and it won't really work. Where I found that actually helped the most was I was teaching in the grad program and brought that up. So then when I was like, hey, I tried this activity and they didn't like it, then I got a lot of feedback that they're like, oh, this could help you better, or like, I didn't like it. And they gave me some feedback that helped. So I did do it a little bit, but I think I did it mostly kind of in the beginning, almost as like a reassurance thing, where it's like, oh, I'm trying something new. And in case they can tell that I'm nervous, or it doesn't seem as I'm like, oh wait, I'm explaining this, or I like stumble as I'm trying to explain something. It almost felt like a good security blanket to be like, hey, I'm trying something new and here's why I'm trying something new. I want to get better. But now I found that like, when I'm doing kind of the first day spiel or even the last day spiel or doing those little check-ins, it's more kind of built in there as they've figured out, like kind of what Mihai was saying a little bit, and even what David was saying, it makes you almost a little bit more on the same page as your students, where you're looking for feedback from them and they're giving you feedback. So I didn't find that I had to talk about it as much because I was doing kind of other points and other check-ins where it was like, hey, you're helping me, I'm helping you. And it wasn't maybe as adversarial as it felt like being, when you learn as a grad student, it's like, go in and here's this department syllabus. And when they ask, for this, and you say no, because that's not what we do or something, it felt like we were on the same page a lot more. So I felt that I didn't have to do it as much. But in the beginning, I read the syllabus statement, I emphasized it when I was like, okay, I'm trying this new thing. And maybe I also got that extra feedback because I did say it, but at the same time, it was kind of nice in the beginning as like oh, in case they'd had me before, or they heard, oh, she might do this, because they all talk, right? Then it was like, oh no, she did something new. It was nice to have kind of it there as like a security blanket, but by the end, I didn't feel that I needed it compared to the other techniques that I had learned, or the other ways to talk, or the other language available.
Some other good techniques that you've picked up from participating in this course that have worked well or that didn't work so well. What else have you done that you wouldn't have done before this?
I don't know if I can raise
There's a couple things. Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, well, there are a couple of things that I did that I would not have normally done. And some of them, I mean, one of the things that I liked about the course is that some of the techniques were really small and simple. Like there were just little tweaks rather than, completely rethinking what I was going to do. Because you're doing this week by week. And in the beginning, I remember being afraid, am I going to have to recalibrate everything I do every single week, to come up with a way to incorporate some of these techniques. And some of them were significant changes and some of them were just little tweaks. And one of the things that I struggle with in my classes, and I've always struggled with, is it takes me a very long time to learn students' names. And that's something that, has been a problem for me my entire career. It took me half a semester to learn most of the students in class names. And while that was something that seems really simple, at this point in my career, having done this for a number of years, and I would have felt silly coming up with that idea on my own. And the course kind of gave me permission to just do something that simple. And so I did in that case, the first time I did that, and this was back, January, early February of 2020, before COVID, when we started this cohort. And I said to my classes, I said, look, here's the deal. I'm not good at this. I'm admitting to you that I'm not good at this. And I'm taking this course that is, helping me work on some things and improve and develop some new techniques in the classroom. And so here's one simple thing that I'm going to try. I'm going to have you guys make name tags. And we're going to use them for the first 2 weeks. And hopefully it's going to help me learn all of your names. And it worked great. And it took away some of my anxiety over that. Like I said, it kind of gave me the permission structure that I needed to say, okay, here's something that I'm doing that I've never done before, that seems really simple and kind of silly, but actually made a difference for me and for my students, because they react much better to you when you can call on them by name. It's definitely a real thing. And so then in the fall, despite COVID and everything, I did it again, and I explained again why I started doing this, and this is something that I'm going to do. And then this past spring, it's now become just something that I do with my classes. I'm going to have you guys make name tags because again, it's a personal weakness of mine. Another thing that I didn't do before that the course really kind of emphasized in a number of modules was trying to make an explicit connection between assignments I'm giving the students and the learning objectives for the course, saying this is, this paper assignment fulfills this objective. When we talk about this at the start, on the first day of class, when you look on the syllabus and here are these learning objectives, here's how this fits into that. And, to try and constantly be using that as kind of the structure of the course, that those objectives are something you're always pursuing, and here's how we're pursuing that. That wasn't something I did before. I didn't talk about that after the first day of class, and I didn't put on assignments, here's how this relates to that. But I do that now. And so that's another example of just, like I said, just kind of minor changes. Because some of the things are some of the techniques and things are significant, new exercises to try in the classroom, but some are just, take what you already do and tweak it and do it a little bit differently. And those things I thought, were really very helpful. And there's a bunch of little things like that I took away from the course that I'm just basically doing now.
Good. And I know I have the same problem with names. One other thing related to that it just came to mind is one of the things that Vijay Sathi does is she has her students submit a short audio file with them pronouncing their names. Because not only do many of us have trouble remembering names, but we often have trouble remembering or learning how to pronounce names. And if you have a larger class, just having a file where you could just play back the recording so you could master the pronunciation could be really helpful too. And all students have smartphones, virtually all students have smartphones that they could use to record that and share it with you, or you could set up a Flipgrid or something similar where they could submit that. And Zoe posted something in chat about surveys. Just asking general questions about what students don't understand is not always very helpful. I get responses when I've done that where students will say, I have trouble with math, or I don't understand graphs, which is perhaps a little too vague. Or as Zoe mentioned, I don't understand logarithms. How do you get more specific feedback, Zoe?
I'm trying to remember the specific questions I asked, but something was like, why are we not allowed to have a negative number as the input of a logarithm, for example, or just something where they have to talk about something that shows they thought about the concept, anything really a conceptual question beyond just a calculation question, because a lot of the time they would just do a calculation without really understanding it. And so I'm trying to get at, do they really understand the concept here? And just a side note on that, Janet had asked me how I make the survey and when I send it. So I use Google Forms if I'm online, or paper when I'm in person. And I give it at the end of every single class. I say it counts for their attendance grade. That's how I keep track of whether they were there. And the attendance is worth a teeny tiny component. It's like 4% is attendance and classroom engagement combined. So it's not that it's actually worth anything, but just knowing that it's not worth nothing is hopefully enough.
I've always used forms in my large class because with hundreds of students, it's just easier to get all the responses in the spreadsheet. But for anyone who's used iClicker, the new iClicker Cloud has a default built-in free response question, which is an exit ticket. And when you close the session, it prompts you, do you want to implement an exit ticket activity for that class? So it's built in with a prompt to remind you to do it, which is kind of nice. So that's a new feature that we should have available very shortly. And I think Nick was up next. I think Nick.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I kept talking over people. Sorry about that, Bill. I did want to just compliment him on one great line. I feel the same way that this course gave us the permission to do stuff. I think that was really a good way to put it, because these are weird techniques for some of us. And, implementing something like this with a bunch of adults in a classroom is challenging without that support. So I think having the user testimonials and everyone else talking about how they were having success with some of these techniques was helpful. The one technique that I think I probably used more than anything else was the lecture outline. I know this is really like a very subtle thing. I tend to try to give as dramatic, engaging lectures as possible, especially when I have 120 students in front of me. But running lectures like that, can sometimes put you at risk of like missing the point, right? You maintain engagement, but you're not necessarily teaching as much. So to balance that out, I just have made PDFs of every lecture that I've given. I post the PowerPoints and the PDF of this one-page lecture outline, just hitting all the key points. And that actually served two purposes for me. One, obviously, it was something to give to the students, and I would hope that it assisted them with note-taking and studying. And comparing the grades from this identical sections from one semester where I used them to the other semester where I didn't, it looks like there might be some change, which was encouraging. But bigger for me was the fact that actually writing out those outlines that organized everything in the lecture made me realize how crappy some of my lectures actually were. And it forced me to redesign them to kind of get all of the essential topics covered in a meaningful way. And as a result, I really tweaked a lot of the instruction that I was given. And I mean, so twofold, it really served a couple of different purposes. And I'm just, this is an iterative process where I'm going to go back and forth and continue changing things. But I think that was really a nice way of kind of keeping everything together and summarize what the goals or the learning objectives were for every lesson that I had given.
And it starts with a focus on backwards design, thinking about what are the really important things you're trying to get to in terms of student learning. And then you can adjust what you're doing on the fly if need be to get to those points rather than getting bogged down in other things. I think that's a really good approach. Ranjit.
Yeah, I was going to say, one thing I really liked, as Bill mentioned, is that a lot of these are really minor modifications that you can make, but that can make a big difference. I like being able to make a little change where I don't have to change the whole syllabus, because we were doing these modules usually after the syllabus was already created. So you had to be able to work them in somehow. And I liked the flexibility there. One that I really liked, because one of my classes, the economic history, has a lot of discussion in it, was having students split off into small groups of, like, say 3 students. They would have a discussion among themselves, and just basically with stuff they'd prepared, because they have a discussion prep paper each week, see what seems to land, what seems to get the most discussion going, and then they could share that with the larger group later. That seemed to work quite well. And you can also do that with Zoom too, with breakout rooms.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other takeaways?
Building on what Ranjit just said about the discussions, I liked the activity. I think it maybe was called analytic teams, where each student was assigned a role in the discussion. Someone will argue in favor of something, someone will argue against it. Someone will just pick holes in what the other people said. I don't remember what the 4th role was. I think I always had groups of 3, but I found it really helpful to make sure that the students, first of all, could maintain some distance from the debate, potentially if it were something controversial, instead of having to argue their own beliefs. Saying you'll argue this assigned position, I think, helped them be more open to saying whatever they were saying, rather than thinking people would judge their opinion. And it made sure everyone had something specific to do in that discussion.
Sorry. Any other takeaways? Nick?
Just one other brief thing. Yeah, this was already mentioned in the each module has the kind of classroom observation component to it, the listen, watch. And I found that those were more useful for me to identify the bad things that I was doing than to identify the good things that we could be doing. Just throwing that out there. I don't know if anyone else felt that way, but I am very cognizant of identifying all of these bad practices that I have now. So that was extremely useful for that.
Now, in our first cohort, we had regular meetings with participants in the program, and most people showed up to those. But then we had a session like this right before the second cohort started, and one of the people who attended said that they never attended and didn't find it necessary. So when we did meetings for this cohort, very few people ever showed up. As we're planning for the next cohort, would it be helpful to have regular meetings, or were you content working just, separately interacting with the Canvas shell?
I personally found the meetings extremely helpful because I was able to attend them in the spring, and then in the fall there was only one session, which unfortunately was at a time when I had class, and I basically made zero progress in the fall, as you know. So I found having a weekly meeting was really helpful for just staying on track.
Our attendance at those dropped, though, from about 20 people or so down to 2 or 3, which is why we cut down to just one day. The advantage I see of having everyone do it is you could have the discussion in person rather than the online discussion, with the option of doing it either way, and kind of a high flex type arrangement. But people can share their thoughts and reactions, and there's some gain for that, in terms of just sharing your experiences. So we're certainly happy to resume that. What does everyone else think? Zoe was one of the people who did show up quite often. Most of the time.
Keeping attendance, Zoe.
Well, it was always good to talk to Zoe.
John does keep attendance. He can tell me exactly how many of these events I've attended.
We do.
I've asked.
May I ask a question? It's got nothing
Sure.
to do with the question. It'll be really quick. Thank you. I'm just here because John happened to mention by accident in another meeting with Fact 2 that this group exists, and I had assumed it was all SUNY Oswego, but there's Zoe. So I'm wondering how this group formed, and can I join?
Oh, the Zoe is from Oswego, but all the faculty, well, that this is a program offered through the provost's office out on Oswego's campus. It's a pretty expensive program, actually, but it's a really good program.
Then never mind. I bet I can't join in that case.
But you can talk to whoever the new president du jour is at Oneonta.
Yeah,
I mentioned that because there have been, 3 presidents in the last 2 years or so?
Yeah, and a lot of provosts too. And I do know Zoe from Oneonta, but anyway.
Okay.
This is really wonderful because there's so much practical information here. Not a lot of dithering and people talking about feelings. Instead, they're talking about how to get the work done, which I love. I'm going to try to sneak in anyway, John. You know that.
Oh, well, anyone is welcome to any of our workshops. So, but the ACUE program, there is a fee.
Okay.
And if I've seemed distracted recently, it's because my furnace went out, and I'm trying to get it turned back on from the app now because a plumber was showing up, and I had to wake up my wife, which is why I was muted a couple of times.
This is all very interesting, John.
Okay. Okay, so I think I got it running now. Okay, so again, going back to that session, would it be helpful to do regular sessions again in person, or were you content because most of you worked, independently just through the Canvas thing? And I think everyone has gotten more comfortable working through learning management systems and online learning now. Would you like to see the same sort of mixes? We can always offer it, and if no one attends, we can drop it. But are there any preferences for the group?
I want to add something. I think if these meetings have a more applied nature, in a sense that, so module 2E, people are working on technique 1, 2, 3. If the people who are joining can be split up in groups, a group that did technique 1, group that did technique 2, and then they can talk to one another about what went wrong, how would, how did they fix a particular thing? What were some of the challenges that they encounter? How did they overcome that? So I feel that an applied nature of these meetings would probably be of help. In a sense, acting like a supplement to the discussion and the interaction that we already do in the chat, which is also part of one of these modules. There's a discussion component.
So you think it would be most effective as a reflection activity after you've done it, or would it be most effective in planning activities moving for the next activity you're going to implement?
Oh, that's a good idea. I was thinking more as a ex post type of meeting where people would discuss after they have implemented techniques. But I could see a meeting that precedes the implementation of those techniques or precedes a module.
Well, that's something we could always work out with the next cohort. And it's probably the safest thing is to schedule it. And then once we get the next cohort together. And my guess is we'll have more details sometime later this summer. The plan, if everything goes forward with the funding, is that a new cohort will be starting up in October or so. And that way it'd be announced at the Academic Affairs Retreat, and we'd solicit some additional members there in August. So any other things you'd like to discuss in terms of what went well with the program and what didn't? I know this was a challenging environment. And Zoe, you mentioned falling behind. Almost everybody fell behind. There were 2 or 3 people who didn't. And the fall was a workload that none of us had ever expected before. So, I'm impressed with how well everyone got caught up and got everything done. So, you guys did an amazing job under really difficult circumstances. Did you find it helpful in working with the new environment of teaching and, during a pandemic? Were there any things that...
Sorry, it was helpful to see what the students were experiencing in terms of, how if you have an online asynchronous course, you can just forget about it pretty easily. Not forget about it, but just, you don't do it for a couple of weeks and then a couple more weeks have passed. And then you're submitting your last thing at 11:58 on the day of the deadline. And all of that I thought was good to just see the students' perspective. And, in the end, you're watching the videos on 1.25 speed because maybe then you can get through it. So all these things that, the students do, it was, I thought, helpful to see that experience.
Any other thoughts there?
I think it was ironic of the fact that we were trying these things and implementing them right about the time that we were kind of having to do this anyway, because in switching from in-person learning to hybrid or to online, we were kind of reinventing the wheel as we went anyway. So it was like, what better time to throw this stuff in there and see if it works. I think it'd be interesting for those of us who didn't teach any like full face-to-face classes over the last year. Now we get to test these things out in front of face-to-face next year. So, but I think we kind of had that little small lab instance where maybe I think there was probably more understanding on the part of our students that we were trying things out just because they knew that was the nature of what we were up against. So I just think it was interesting timing for our cohort going through this at the time that we did and kind of having that different context with which we were trying these things out.
Yeah, and to kind of build on that, I was someone that, and this is probably, I had done online classes before, so I'm someone that likes to sometimes either work ahead or I would just carve out and put on my calendar, like you're working on this. So I never really had the falling behind experience, but I was really thankful when they did open some of the stuff early over the summer, because it was the stuff related to backwards design and like checking kind of, looking over what you're assessing, what levels is it getting at, how is it related to Bloom's taxonomy? And I found that really helpful to then, as I was going, oh God, how am I going to teach, my classes in the fall, and I hadn't taught this one here at this institution yet, or had just come from the spring where it was like different, having that time over the summer and having that stuff open early, like it, kind of like Ranjit said earlier, like when we had started, some of the stuff, like the syllabi is already there. So you can't make too many changes other than little tweaks, which was nice. But then to have some of that, they really wanted you to end on the like, okay, now think when you're designing a class, take all this information. I liked having a little bit of that kind of sandwiched in the summer, because then that gave me a little bit more confidence going into the fall, where I had this tool set to kind of revolve around and be like, oh, okay, actually I looked over and, I'll scrap that activity this time because it's not aligning. I'll have to rethink it. But I was like, all right, then cut, keep. And I had like justification why I did what I did. And that really helped me to have kind of those tools and a little bit more like the worksheet model of like, okay, look over your stuff, reflect on it. So as someone that likes to work ahead, it felt like I got to cheat and work ahead a little, but it wasn't like bad for performance where, in a regular class, if you were to work ahead at some point, you're not scaffolded enough. In this case, it was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, sure. Go ahead, work ahead on this because you can. So I did like that part as well.
You were the exception on the working ahead, I think. But yeah, having that time over the summer, I think, was a good idea. And I think it was your suggestion, and we requested that and got it open. I think it was you, or it might have been, was it David? I don't remember. Okay, any other thoughts about ACUE?
I think one thing we were kind of lucky about in some ways is, we had just started this when COVID hit last March, and because, all of us had to make this sudden transition in what we were doing to online teaching during the spring semester last year, the fact that there were that every module had a couple of online teaching techniques, I thought was actually really helpful to me, because it's like, okay, how do I suddenly transform what I'm going to do? Oh, well, look, this is the module that I was doing this week already when we got the news that we were going to have to start to prepare to do that. And here are some things that it says to do. And so it was an additional resource in that respect, as much as it was also added work. And I think a lot of the reason why a lot of us fell behind is because we were doing so much other things that we wouldn't normally have to do, both, especially during the shutdown last spring when we had to suddenly convert everything, but also in the fall when we were trying to figure out how to go forward. It kind of pushed doing those weekly modules a little bit on the side burner, but still having that as a resource was really valuable. And I taught hybrid courses in both the fall and spring of this year, and it was helpful to me because then there were things from the modules that I could, that were for both face-to-face classes and online classes that I could fall back on as, these are ways to approach some of the things that I'm trying to deal with here. So in some respects, we were lucky about the timing because it gave us that added resource, even as it was more work that I think none of us really wanted to have to do, to be doing this week to week. When we were dealing with so many other things we didn't expect, it was that I really did feel like, it helped me figure some things out that I would have struggled with more otherwise.
I've heard that from a number of people about how ACUE was really helpful when people had to learn new things anyway, to have those resources available there. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, thank you and congratulations on all you who finished. And I'm hoping we have another cohort. It's looking really likely. So Provost Furlong is meeting with people from ACUE now to look at some options. Oh, and there's a message from our dean in Arts and Sciences. For those of you in Oswego, there is a Pride flag raising at the Civic Plaza at 5 o'clock to celebrate Pride Month. And apparently it's a beautiful day for it. I haven't been outside yet, but I know it was really nice outside earlier this week. So,
if I can also just add, because of course it wouldn't be me if I didn't, in addition to it being Pride Month, this is also National Gun Violence Awareness Month. So, if anybody has any questions, concerns, happy thoughts, really no happy thoughts, or grievances or any questions that do arise, certainly please feel free to send them my way, as this is something I get to deal with on a daily basis.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you at some of our workshops coming up. And if I don't see you, have a wonderful summer and get some rest. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thanks. Okay, I'll stop the recording.